Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for Activity 97. We're going to skip Activity 96 because it's an activity that we can't do from home. So we are going to move in. Activity 97 is called Origin of the Species. So if you look at the top, you can see I have pictures of three different kinds of bears: polar bears, brown bears, and black bears. And so the question you want to ask is, why are there three types of bears? Why don't we just have one species called bear? But instead we have three. Now we should be able to recognize that the polar bear lives where it's cold and it's adapted to living in the snowy environment. And the brown grizzly bear is adapted to its environment, colder. It's a very large animal. It hibernates in the winter. Um, Thick fur coat, but brown to match the trees. And then you have the black bear, which is more common around here. He's smaller, he doesn't have as much space. He eats different foods. The shape of his feet are very different. He climbs trees. So the bears have adapted to different environments. But how does that happen? A polar bear cannot successfully cross with the other bears, meaning they can't have offspring because they are considered different species. So we're going to get into that, what it means to be a different species. So go ahead and set up your notebook. Activity 97, our challenge question today. At the end of this, by the time we're done with this, the end of this week, you should be able to describe to me the role that mutations play in natural selection. And remember, we've been working on the idea that mutations make us different. They cause that variation and allows things to be better suited. So we are going to define, there's two key vocab. I only have one up here on the screen right now. I will do one at a time. So go ahead and jot down the definition for a species. It is defined as a group of similar organisms that can breed successfully. Okay. Remember, I always remind you that you can pause this video as you need to write and then start back once you're finished writing. Okay. So what does that mean? A group of similar organisms that can breed successfully. Okay, here's what it means. Breeding successfully just means that two organisms can exchange their DNA and create an offspring. But the trick is that that offspring has to also be able to reproduce. So if you remember when we were in class, we talked about the fact that you are half your mom and half your dad, and the male DNA and the female DNA go together, half of their full set go together to make the embryo, which forms the baby. So in this case on the screen, if I take a male horse and a female horse, they can exchange their DNA, put it together, and they can create a baby horse. And then as the baby horse grows up, it can then mate with a partner and then have its own baby offspring. That's successful reproduction. Two parents create a baby that can also create a baby. So you should ask then, what is unsuccessful breeding? Okay. Unsuccessful breeding has two choices, really. The first choice is you have two animals, maybe from a different species. So in the picture I have, a cat and a dog. Cat DNA and dog DNA do not match up. Their traits are not similar enough. Um, their genes would be in different locations. And so if you can envision in your mind the DNA I drew on the board, remember the genes had to align on both sides so the DNA zipped up and made that double helix. Well, in the case of the cat and the dog, the DNA doesn't align at all, and that DNA is not going to zip up, and a baby would never be able to form because those two halves of DNA cannot go together. You get nothing. Okay, that's choice one. Choice two is, what if the DNA is close enough? So there are some times where you have species that are different, but they have so much in common that their DNA is close enough. So let's use the example of a horse and a donkey. So here's my horse, here's my donkey. Their DNA has enough in common. They are closely enough related that their DNA will zip up. It's kind of like if you've ever had a coat where it's missing one of the teeth and the zipper kind of works, but it gets stuck and it comes undone sometimes, and you can fix it. You can still zip it up, but it's not a perfect zip, if you know what I'm talking about. That's kind of like the horse and the donkey. So the horse and the donkey DNA will zip, but it's broken. It's got some problems. So it makes an offspring. In this case, it will make a mule. The problem with mules is they can't reproduce. Mules can't make mule babies. The only way to get a mule is from a horse and a donkey. So since the mule is not able to reproduce, that reproduction is considered unsuccessful. The mule is what we call a hybrid. It's a cross between two animals of different species, and they're all kind of hybrids. And if we have a day where we don't use as much time, I'll show you a few of the really cool ones. But for right now, just to keep things short, we won't go too far into hybrids. So these two animals, different species, create a third type of animal, but that animal cannot reproduce. Okay, so that takes us to our next definition. So the next thing I want you to write down is the definition of the word speciation. Speciation is defined as the divergence or branching of one species into two distinct species. So far, we have not really talked about where new organisms come from. We've talked about the fact that organisms are related and animals had common ancestors and they were closely related to other things. We talked about the woolly mammoth being more closely related to the Asian elephant. We didn't really talk about why there's an Asian elephant and why there's an African elephant. Why is there not just elephants? So speciation attempts to explain that. There are times where DNA becomes different, okay? So remember that mutations change your DNA. If DNA within a species becomes so different because of these mutations that it can no longer reproduce successfully, then we say we have two new species. And that's kind of a tricky concept. I'm going to give you an example. Just one today. I want you to think about it. You don't have to write anything down. I just want you to kind of pay attention and see if it makes sense a little bit to you. And then if you're really confused, send me some emails and I can walk you through it a little bit or give you some more examples. Okay, so let's pretend that we have a population of wild fruit flies minding their own business on several bunches of rotting bananas, cheerfully laying their eggs in the mushy fruit. So take a close look at those fruit flies down here. We have certain coloring. We have wings. Notice their coloring matches what? You should all kind of notice that it's matching this ground, the background for them. So they're a little bit camouflaged. So they're just going about their business, reproducing. But then a disaster strikes. A hurricane washes the bananas and the immature fruit flies that they contain out to sea. The banana bunch eventually washes up on an island off the coast of the mainland. The fruit flies mature and emerge from their slimy nursery onto the lonely island. The two portions of the population, the mainland and the island, are now too far apart for gene flow to unite them. So at this point, speciation has not occurred. Any fruit flies that got back to the mainland could mate and reproduce healthy offspring with the mainland flies. So here's your mainland over here, and the adult flies stayed there. The babies were washed across the ocean on the bananas, and now they're on the island. But take a look. The plants are different, and the ground is different. Okay, that's important. Right now, if we took these baby fruit flies and somehow got them back to the mainland, they could still reproduce. They are still the same species. Okay, but the populations start to diverge. So because ecological conditions are different on the island, and the island population evolves under different selective pressures and experiences different random events in the mainland population, their morphology, food preferences, and courtship displays change over the course of many generations of natural selection. So what does that mean? It means that random mutations would occur on the island. Let's say one fly is born with this different coloring. Notice that they're lighter now, and blended into the sand. So if we have one or two fruit flies that have that single mutation, those flies would be better suited. The lighter flies would survive and the darker flies would start to die off. Notice their eyes are a different color as well, caused by a mutation. If the green eye provides a certain type of advantage, you would see that spread in the population. You see the hearts, they're trying to tell you that the fruit flies, maybe the conditions are different on the island, and so they reproduce at different times or different parts of the season. And all of those changes accumulate, okay? So they are evolving differently because they are in a different environment. The mainland flies just keep doing what they're doing. When another storm reintroduces the island flies back to the mainland, it flies them back over. They will not readily mate with the mainland flies because they've evolved different courtship behaviors. So they don't even try to mate in the beginning. The few that do mate with the mainland flies produce inviable eggs, which means the offspring does not form. Okay, there are too many genetic differences between the two populations. At that point, we would say the lineage has split because the genes can't flow back and forth. So we're not talking about a fruit fly turning into a bird. We're talking about a fruit fly turning into a different type of fruit fly. That's speciation. It's just these little tiny changes, but the tiny changes add up. And because those two separate places, the animals that live there weren't sharing genes, the changes that happened on the island stayed on the island and got passed down through those generations. And the adaptations on the mainland stayed the same because those animals were better suited to the mainland environment. And so now the DNA is so different that when they came together, the DNA doesn't zip up anymore. It's a broken zipper. And so it can't even make an offspring. And anytime that happens, we say you have two different species. And so that's kind of what this week is about. It's about how mutations can lead to different types of species. So that's all we're going to do in terms of your notebook. Make sure you have the title, the challenge question, and the two definitions. If you want to go back and take notes on speciation, you're more than welcome to do that. You don't have to. It's important to me that you understand how it works, and we will keep moving forward with some different ideas and some different examples to try and help you with that. So when you're done with this video, there is another 2-minute video. It's an evolution video about new species. So it's only 2 minutes long. I'd really like you to watch it. There is no graded work today. We'll continue on with Activity 97 tomorrow. Okay? Thanks, guys.